Hello, it's Monday, March 10th. I'm Jeff Noedel, and this is another conversation with leaders of OPALCO, the Rural Electric Cooperative serving the San Juan Islands since 1937. With me today is Vince Dauciunas, President of the Board of OPALCO, and Foster Hildreth, OPALCO's General Manager. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Good afternoon,
Good
Jeff.
afternoon.
So let's talk today about the project known as the Baylor Hill Solar Microgrid. I think many people know all about this and have been following it. First, a couple why questions. First of all, why is OPALCO trying to build local renewable projects?
I could take that one, Vince, if you're all right with that. I'm really glad you asked that question first, because the reason that we're getting into the renewable generation business is pretty new. I mean, we're seeing on the mainland that the grid is becoming more and more or less reliable than ever before. And what we're really trying to plan for is when the supply of power is going to be shorter than the demand, we're going to have rolling blackouts is really the prediction. And the next time a coal plant is shut down gets precarious on our grid. We know there's a coal plant being shut down in Centralia. There's a 750 megawatts of coal generation that's actually going to leave our grid, which is a great thing for the carbon reduction point. But the grid is actually becoming precarious, and that's what we're trying to get out in front. If we build it locally, not only can we control the cost and the pricing of that power, but it's also going to benefit us from a reliability standpoint. Vince, you want to add anything on kind of the bigger picture?
Yeah, that's just the reason, again, we're looking for the local generation is two things. One is reliability, and the second is affordability. From the reliability point of view, the thing that's happening in Washington State is that because of the mandates that we're seeing from CETA and CCA and initiatives that have gone forward moving towards renewable energy, is that the supply of dispatchable power is being shut down faster than the renewables are being put in. The second is energy density. To basically replace something the size of a 750 megawatt coal plant takes 3,000 or 4,000 megawatts worth of wind or solar and multiple tens of thousands of acres and a lot of battery storage to do it. So there are renewable sources and renewable projects that are going on being built, but they're really tied up in the permitting processes in Washington State. There's over 10 of these projects in the Energy Facility Site Evaluation Council that are going to take years to get through that. So we're getting them shut down, prices are going up, and we want to respond to keep the lights on.
So why did OPALCO pick the Baylor Hill location?
Baylor Hill location, it's a great location in proximity to our existing infrastructure. We got some great feeder lines that are running through that area, and incorporating the solar into the grid is really a big component. The closer we can get to our grid, the lower the price points are to make those connections, and that's really important. In addition to that, though, we want to make sure that the locations that we put renewable generation are equivalent to where our big loads are, where the homes are, where the commercial operations are. And if we could tie those into the infrastructure in close proximity to those lines, that's a big benefit for us. And so we found a location over on Baylor Hill, which was really beneficial. Now, there's not a lot of land for sale. I don't know how many people really understand, you kind of look and see what's around you and you try to figure out how to get a hold of a piece of land. But we also wanted to find something that works well with not a lot of trees on it, something that has a really good solar profile, and it really ticked all the boxes for us. And came up on Baylor Hill, and it was kind of a good win. The property owner was willing to sell at a decent price, and I think he was limited on what he could do based on the agricultural use of it, and really benefited us because the agricultural use of it, really there weren't a lot of trees, and it turned out when we were doing our due diligence that it wasn't the most productive soil around either. So it was a kind of a good win for us.
Vince, would you like to describe the process that OPALCO went through to apply for the permit for the project?
Well, because of the zoning that we currently have in the county, we have to get a conditional use permit for that. So that means submitting the application to the county, and we have to meet all SEPA, the State Environmental Protection Act, and NEPA, the National Environmental Protection Act. And The other zoning considerations are there. So that's a formal application that goes into the county, into the Department of Community Development. They go through the process. It's a give and take. They'll take the initial application. They'll have some questions and require clarifications. It comes back to us. We do that. We go back and forth several times on it. And Foster, I think you can back me up. I think that process has taken well over a year and a half at this point.
Yeah, it really has. Let me start from back when we first brought the property, because I think that's really important. Right when we were entertaining the purchase of Baylor Hill, we actually went through a pre-development permit, or I don't know if it's a permit, but a pre-development working project with the county. So what we do is we say, hey, we got a project. Here's what we're trying to accomplish. Can you review the documents that we have, what we've accumulated? Does it make sense? Because we knew we had to go through what Vince just described, a conditional use permit. They went through that preliminary application, looked at everything, was a big thumbs up. The staff at the time were thinking, wow, this is a community solar project. This makes a lot of sense. At the time we were kind of the equivalent of a solar farm, if you will, and it seemed very consistent with that piece of land and what it was permitted for. I would say there's one other thing that we wanted to touch on is the county's land use tables they're all old and archaic. They're based on the old-fashioned, generation that OPALCO had, back in the 30s, which was in the 40s, which was a big diesel generator. It has loud noise associated with it. It has, gas, it has diesel generation with fuel tanks and so forth. So we really need to change the land use tables. And we were figuring that we would go through this process from a permitting perspective, understand what the challenges were, then come back to the county and say, hey, we really need to update and modernize those land use tables for passive generation, for solar and other renewable generation, as opposed to that loud, noisy stuff that we've been using in the past.
So where does Baylor Hill stand now, and what's next?
Well, that's a big, deep breath. So Baylor Hill, what we did is we went through a long process and went through, it's a conditional use permit. And we again went through the preliminary application. It gives you a list of things you need to do, and we've done those. Then we get into kind of public engagement, and we go through the CUP process, which we're fine with. We submitted wetland studies that were done part of that pre-application process. And we were really trying to push forward as fast as we could, even though it took us well over a year, because we wanted to, we had a low-income solar grant that we got through Washington State's Department of Commerce. But it required some schedule adjustments. We wanted to make sure that we could end the project to meet those guidelines. And so we were really pushing forward with it. And the permitting of the Baylor Hill project kept going on and on and on. And lo and behold, there was more requirements for us to submit additional documents above and beyond what we originally were planning for. So we started to realize that we weren't going to make that low-income solar grant deadline. So what we did is we have to retool. We don't want to lose that. We're trying to look at other alternatives so we don't lose that low-income solar grant, and we're looking at other locations to accomplish that. So at this stage, what we've done is, because we knew there's going to be another further review through the Department of Ecology for reasons that we're fine with. It's just it went outside that grant guideline. So we put a hold on the Baylor Hill portion of it, and we're going to complete those studies at a later date as a follow-up. There's no urgency now. And hopefully we could focus on low-income solar over on Decatur, closer to where our existing facility is, where we have less permitting challenges over there.
So is Baylor Hill on hold? Is it simply on hold, or even just slowed down? It's not done. It's not over.
It's not done in any way, shape, or form. It's slowed down. I think that's a good term. We still have to produce additional permit requirements through I think it was through the Department of Ecology. There's a wetland report that was requested at the tail end that was going to be pretty exhaustive, that we're going to go through. We're going to still complete that. We want to make sure that we protect our environment in every way, shape, and form. And there's a need for us to do that, to make sure that there's not a wetland in the areas. Wetlands are really interesting. They're in agricultural land, most people have a lot of parcels have they call it a farm pond, and the farm ponds are not, considered wetland in those areas. And that was part of what our our study did. So we have a farm pond that's on the site that we were staying away, basically not putting anything on it or near it. But there's some further study and review that Department of Ecology recommended that we're going to get at a later date. But now that we're past that low-income solar deadline, we got to look elsewhere.
Hey, Vince, is
Mhm.
OPALCO talking with the county about some just how it could support projects like this, some sort of streamlining, or what's the latest with your talks with the county?
Yeah, I'd say we're having productive dialogues. We're meeting with the county council members individually. We're talking with the county manager, working with the departments, and sitting down and trying to explain what's the rationale. Why are we doing what we're doing? What are the benefits to the county going to be? And what sort of help do we need? So we're trying to engage the county so that they're a partner, working with OPALCO to solve our energy problems going forward. And I'd say they've been very receptive to us so far. I'm quite pleased with the dialogue.
Yeah, and I know the new county council members that we have are really understanding we need to modernize those land use tables to allow us to build what we need desperately in our area to avoid blackouts. I mean, it's really that clear to us, and now we got to work through that the process of getting those updated, which is a little bit cumbersome. We put in we call it a docket request. Every year, the county has a process where you can put in request of trying to fix different aspects of some of the permitting process is the one we used it for. And when they opened up that docket process, we submitted kind of like a land use table review based on our solar renewable generation project. So hopefully we can work through those. When you said how long are you on hold, it's really as long as it's going to take to get through that docket process, hopefully, and then we can get clarification so we don't have to continue on with additional reports for a longer period of time than we've already gone through.
So, well, solar is not the only kind of renewable energy that OPALCO is interested in that you'd like to create. We here in the San Juans have more coastline than any other part of the state of Washington, any other county anyway. The Kitsap Sun says we have 400 miles of coast. Does that sound right? People in Kitsap thought that they had the most, which is 250 miles. And the Kitsap Sun, to their credit, had to correct people and say, no, the San Juans have 400 miles. So tidal, we're going to talk about tidal energy. What's the status of the tidal generation grant, and why did you go after that for the Rosario Strait? Can you talk about that?
God, many years ago, there was a group that was actually trying to put in tidal generating in our facilities, or at least they were going through a permit. And it was really interesting for me. I know that was right when I started with OPALCO. It was like, why aren't we doing that? Why aren't we investigating that? I know that we could do a much better job protecting our environment than some, out of the area utility. So it's always something that I was thinking about. And I know the board was very supportive of, we always look at, our version of California's sun is probably our water generation capabilities. And so we've been always intrigued with it. Lo and behold, the grant cycles came up from the last administration, and there was a group out of Department of Energy. It was the Water and Power Group, and they came up with, hey, do you guys want to do a test, a pilot, and see if it even has feasibility in our area? And I said, well, that's perfect. We don't have to go and jump right into some tidal generation. Let's go study it. Let's make sure that we can accomplish what we need to from a financial perspective and an environmental perspective, and have the government help with the funding of that. So we got a $3 million grant to study tidal to see if it's feasible in our area. So we've gotten a hold of that. It's really interesting. It's a different process that we're used to. Normally what you do is you develop a project and you submit a permit, and then it goes through an arduous process. This is before all that. And I think it's been really eye-opening for us, because we're really trying to get out in front of it and have conversations with sovereign nations and a whole bunch of boat builders and ship builders around that could actually generate the jobs and so forth around us, but also look at the tidal generation and the metrics and some of the speeds of the tidal flow. It's been really it's been a great process for us to analyze. Are we going to go forward with it? We'll see. We're right in the middle of the tidal investigation of the pilot, if you will. And we're just about to collect it. Probably later on this spring, we'll get to a point where we'll provide some information to our board, and they'll know where we are, whether it's a feasible project for us to consider or to keep going down that road. And that's going to be pretty telling once we get down there. It's a little pricey, but we can get through the economics a little bit. Anything you want to add before I get into that?
Yeah, let me just add a little background from a technical sense as to why bother with that at all. In looking forward, we're working with the county now. Look, they're working on the comprehensive plan, so we're using the population forecasts that come from the county looking forward. So if you take the growth in population, figure out how much power that's going to need, look at the increase that we have in electric vehicles, look at the transition from fossil fuels and heating and cooking, potentially desalination to deal with water in the future. And the big one is when the Washington State ferries get the electrification. So you add all that stuff up, and we're looking at taking our 240,000 megawatt hours now and pushing it well north of 300,000, in the next 10 to 15 years. The cables that supply power from Bonneville are going to be insufficient for that. So we look at a trade-off. To get another power cable might cost $125 to $150 million plus multiple years of. So what's the alternative? If you look at the local generation, if you look at a mix, some solar, some tidal, some battery backup, and perhaps some propane or diesel powered generators, small few megawatts for the real emergency backup. Look at that mix, and we've done simulations on that. And the thing about tidal, solar, between the winter and summer, it's a 6-to-1 difference between what you get. It's that inverted bathtub curve. You get maybe 8 hours in the winter and 12, 14 hours in the summer. That isn't great for you. Tidal's almost constant all the way. So the peak difference between the minimum and the maximum is less than 10 or 15% all year long. And when you look at the energy mix, we don't just want power 8 hours a day out of solar. We have to have dispatchable power to meet the load at any time. So that means the generating source needs to have some battery backup of some sort or storage backup. When you look at the difference, the cost and the amount of battery that you need for equivalent amounts of solar versus tidal, it's 11 times less for tidal than it is for solar. So if you look at it for $29 million worth of solar and the battery backup, you can do it for $7 million with the tidal. So that's a compelling economic story, and that's part of why we want to investigate it and do further deep analysis on an hour-by-hour basis throughout the year to see how these play together.
Now, you have a specific location, right? You have it's a location in Rosario Strait?
Yep, Rosario Strait. It's
Why?
over to, on the other side of, Mount Constitution, if you will, in around Blakely area. There's a great little zone for us. It's in close proximity to one of our, we have a conduit that goes out into the water, so we can avoid some of the disturbing of the eelgrass by using this conduit. So it's a great area. We also chose that area because we did a pretty elaborate study with a prior grant looking at alternatives. And this one had the lowest impact when it came to environmental issues, with fish issues, with whales, with, the salmon that are swimming around in that area. And it really, again, it was one of those check the boxes that we want to check with, the right location to make sure we do it right the first time.
It's such a new idea. It's so out of the box. Do you find people worried a lot about the environmental impacts?
I think so, and I think they should, quite frankly. I think we're all concerned, and that's why we were excited about doing a tidal project. The neat thing about the technology that we chose, that it exists. In fact, it exists in the water right now in the Orkney Islands. And the neat thing about the Orkney Islands is they have, believe it or not, they have more, orca whale populations than we do. I think there's 7 pods in that particular area. And they've done a tremendous amount of environmental research, and video technology has been something that they use quite extensively to make sure that there's no issues with collisions with whales and fish and so forth. And there's never been any impacts over, on their unit that's in the water up on the Orkney Islands. I know, Vince, you've been doing a lot of homework on that.
Yeah, I'll just add to that too. So the Orbital Marine is the company we've been working with, and they've got over 10,000 hours of observations working with the European Marine Energy Center. And these studies have indicated no significant long-term changes in the distribution of birds, mammals due to presence or operation of wave and the tidal devices. They're looking at the whole issues of acoustic monitoring, acoustic noise, benthic, what is it? How is the anchoring going to disturb the bottom? A lot of data and stuff on this. And the Europeans in their community, they're very concerned about their environmental issues too. So they've been working quite heavily on that, and so we've got a lot of hard data that we can apply to our application as we go forward.
Now, is this the same kind of device, or is it even the same device that would be used, the same operation?
Yeah,
we
pretty
do
much.
The latest generation of that thing is called the O2.
Vince, could you describe the actual mechanics? What does the tidal generation contraption do? How does it work?
Okay, so we're working with Marine Orbital out of the Orkney Islands, and the unit that they've been developed there in their second or third generation of this right now is called the O2. And if you visualize it, imagine a 737 airplane. It's 180 feet, 200 feet long, but without the wings on it. So it's a tubular thing. It's like a small yellow submarine but it floats on the surface. And where the wings are, it's got a couple of pods on it that actually have the two turbines. So when it's towed out, these things are raised up. It's towed out to the place it's located. It's anchored with cables to the bottom, and then the two pods go down that have the generating devices on it, and the turbines turn very slowly and generates the electricity. So visually, there's not much to see. It's got a flashing light on it and a few flags or something like that. But by and large, the bulk of it is submerged, washes over the surface, and the generating pods are underwater. The benefit to this compared to other turbine generating devices is that since it's on the surface, if you ever have to do maintenance to it, you just go out in a boat, open a hatch, you go down inside where you can access the mechanics and the electronics. You don't have to have divers go down 300 feet and try to work on something that is submerged. And if you ever have any serious difficulties, you just tow it back to port, do the repair works on it, and put it back out again. So it's really a very clever and innovative approach to tidal generation.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, by the way, there's great information. All the details about the sizes and lengths and so forth are located on our website. We've been studying this and posting a lot of information. There's been some great questions that have been asked throughout our community, and we've been putting a tremendous amount of information on our website. So know that it's there, and reach out to us at our communications group, and we can point you in the right direction if you can't find it.
And what would that cost?
Well, that's what we're trying to figure out as we speak. Right now, we're thinking it's in the $40 to $50 million range, and we're doing those cost estimates. We're having conversations with different shipbuilders in the areas, and we're compiling that good. There's two parts of it. There's one is the building itself. The other one is operating the unit too. And we find that those are challenges when it comes to insurances and some of the other things that are associated with it too.
Have you worked with the tribes? Have you consulted the tribes on this?
We have. We've been. It's interesting because it's one of those preliminary before a permit. I'll give you an interesting take on it. So we've been meeting with the tribes, but it's interesting is I can't my protocols are the tribes are sovereign nations. The equivalent is talking to President Biden, with the chief, and those are sovereign nations that need to be, through the Department of State and so forth, be really in sync with what's going on. The protocols don't really allow our staff to call up the individual nations and start the dialogues that you would expect. And so we follow those protocols. We've done a really good job of really getting in advance of it before a permit is pulled. By the way, when we're done with the pilot study that we're talking about, then we have to go through the whole permitting process, which would go through Department of Energy and FERC, and would get involved in sovereign nations again, and that would be the formal process. So we're going to do all that over again. But we've had some really good conversations with them. Everybody wants to make sure that we do the right thing and that we can prove it up. Like Vince said, there's been lots of studies, but we're still a little bit paranoid about whether or not it's going to work in our area, and we need to prove it up.
What are some of the lingering questions that would be different for us than in this other location where it's working out well?
Well, I don't really think there's a lot of different questions. I think it's just confirming the questions that have been answered up there, and I haven't really seen anything too dramatically different. Tidal generation is really interesting. You don't want something that's really kind of on the surface necessarily. You really want to get a deeper channel. The more shallow you get, the more turbulence you get. So areas that we were studying that didn't make sense, and we wouldn't have any intention of putting something over on like Cattle Point, where you have a lot of tidal flow, but there's a lot of turbulent tidal flow, and there's a lot more environmental whale traffic, and that's where the salmon hang out more. So obviously the orca whales are going to be there as well. So it's really confirming that we have chosen the right location, and we've actually gone through and put some testing and devices in the water to confirm that the tidal flows are sufficient. They're a little bit less than they are in Orkney Islands, but that's not necessarily a bad thing because your equipment lasts a little bit longer too. And we just want to make sure that it reaches the right thresholds that are going to make it feasibly, operational.
I'm going to make a guess, and I might be wrong, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm guessing that people in the industry are pretty curious and interested in the idea of the San Juans trying something like this. We're pretty well known around the country, and it seems to be, I'm not advocating for or against it, but it seems to be, as locations go, pretty ideal, right? We're right in the middle of the Salish Sea, and you could cite this in all kinds of places, but you've picked out what you think is the optimal. Are other people in the industry curious and kind of monitoring what you're doing?
Yeah, and you know what's great? I think we have to face these economic and reliability challenges probably sooner than most utilities because of where we're located. We're at the end of the line where we only serve 20 island. We're a 20 island community. That's who we are. We don't even border, we don't touch the mainland directly. We have to take a ferry to get, coming to and fro. So those challenges are really kind of make us independent, and we got to start thinking we're out here by ourselves, and we got to figure out how are we going to satisfy this. And if we call it islanding in the industry, and if you can island, why wouldn't you want to start with a utility of islands to do it? So I think people are looking to us for some of the wisdom. If we can do the right thing environmentally, because we know that's really in our DNA and that's really essential for us, and if we could make it work, I think that we could be a kind of a microcosm or a pilot where people would go, wow, if they can make a sustainable community out there in 20 island makeup and do the right stuff, then boy, that's a really good showcase for us to take to other utilities.
I might just follow up on that too. I mean, we're being influenced a lot by studies that have been going on. We've been talking with the NREL, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, and Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, and studies on that. And there's the goal basically is to move to essentially a carbon zero generating capacity in the United States by 2050 or so. And various states have gotten different progress towards it. Washington State has adopted that goal significantly. And estimates out of NREL is that the tidal capacity could be as much as 14 to 15% of the total load generation capacity necessary in the United States when you're given our coastline and the application. So Oregon's looking at some of these, California's looking at it. It might be a different story compared to the offshore wind turbines or so, which is facing significant opposition from the current administration. So it's kind of stay tuned. I think whether we go forward or not, it's going to depend upon does it get the check boxes? Is it environmentally sound? Is it economically sound? Is it reliable? Is it going to solve a problem for us? And we're going to have answers yes to all of those before we would go forward with it. But I think the data and the experience that we collect on this is going to be useful for others as they look at it in the United States.
I would also say people look at our tidal generation the way they do all power, what you need 24/7. And what Vince alluded to earlier is really important. It's we need power 24/7, and that reliability is really where tidal comes into play. When the sun goes down, tidal, in certain periods of the day and night are going to still flow. And that's what you look at the economics, and you're able to eliminate really expensive battery technology that you would need if you don't have tidal flowing at that particular point in time. And those are the economics that are intriguing, because those are really pricey, and those are really going to drive our prices up locally if we don't figure out local solutions to renewables.
Vince, that statistic that you cited, 14, 15%, that would be national. It could potentially be
Yes,
that much of the national.
correct.
So presumably it could be way more, a way higher percentage for the San Juans if it worked, if this made sense.
Exactly. I think, again, the secret to this thing is, I think, which you don't find it in the popular media, but it isn't just the generating source, it's the dispatchability of it. You got to have the power when you need it. And that means that the intermittent sources have got to have storage to go along with them. And as an interesting story, the Washington State 2021 energy strategy kind of looks forward to the future, and their goal is that by 2045, 70% of the power in Washington State would be wind, whether that's generated locally or imported from Wyoming and Montana over transmission that doesn't exist. But when you look at the wind record, there's days. I mean, last January, we've got 10, 12 days where the wind power goes to zero. And when you do statistical analysis on it, more than 30% of all the hours in the year, the wind is less than 5% of its nameplate capacity. So you got 3,000 megawatts of wind, and you go days, a third of those hours, it's down at 5%. So that means you got to back it up with stuff. So simple calculation, when you do it, and you say, how much battery storage would you have to have if Washington State had 70% wind and 30% hydro as the total? And you come up with numbers that exceed the total amount of battery storage that exists in the United States right now, or is even forecast going forward. So it's just physically and economically impossible to do it. And I think our legislatures haven't seen the light on that particular issue yet. So stand by, we're going to be working that issue.
Foster, let's say that this passes all your tests and there's a consensus, and the tribes and the environmentalists, everybody is interested, this moves forward, it gets permitted. What percentage of OPALCO's demand could be met with tidal, and maybe more than this project? I mean, you're looking at multiple. What did we say last time we talked? 27 projects for solar. So there probably wouldn't be just one tidal. But how much of the local demand could be met with tidal?
I think it's kind of smart. I'll let Vince get into some of the numbers that go along with it. He knows them really well. The point is, for us, that if once we get into tidal, we're gonna have reliable standards that are going to be enhanced in the nighttime, and I think that's really that duck curve that we're talking about, is trying to get reliable power. It's going to start off fairly small, but those are really expensive electrons because of when they can generate at nighttime. And when you compare that to the battery, just know that even if it's a smaller number than you would expect, those are still very valuable electrons.
Yeah. I'll just give you a kind of a rough estimate. And we're continually working on this, continuing refining it. But looking forward, the past 2035 or so, given the load we've got, you might have a mix of 30 to 45 megawatts worth of solar panels. And at 6 acres per megawatt, you might have 180 to 300 acres worth of solar in there. Tidal energy, maybe 7.5 to 12 megawatts, and that would be three to five of those units that we're talking about. Now, again, they're more expensive as a standalone generating unit than the solar might be, but when you pair the battery requirements to it, it's much, much cheaper. So it's that mix that makes sense. Battery storage of 40 to 80 megawatt hours, which is well within the doability, and some small backup 5 to 8 megawatts or so. So that would get us to 90 to 100,000 megawatt hours a year that would meet all the load growth that we foresee going forward. And again, you don't hold me to that. That's not a dyed-in-the-wool engineering down to the last nut and bolt or so, but it's kind of an estimate that we're working with in our minds when we think about how much land do we need, how much of each type of source do we have, and what kind of reliability and affordability does that give us.
If I can add to that, really important for everybody to understand how much we're trying to accomplish with both tidal and solar. We know that our loads are going to increase anywhere from 30 to 50%, depending on how fast different aspects of our of the economics work in our area. We know that there's a lot of capacity that's going to be needed for AI and data centers and so forth. So our estimates are between 30 and 50% over the next 10 years. We're good today, but in the future, that load growth is going to be really critical for us to make sure that we have. And if we don't have it boy, does that happen really quick. And then we start losing power when we need it the most during a weather event. And my guess it'd probably be in the wintertime when it's nice and cold out there, we get a wind inversion, and then the region is really not going to have the power to continue once that coal plant is shut down. So for us to embrace this, we don't need a lot. We need enough to get that 30% load growth to start. And if we could have that 30%, we talked at numbers, and if you looked at land mass for a combination of tidal and maybe some land mass for the solar side, on the solar side we're looking at a half of 1% of the land that we currently have in the county. Now that's infinitesimal when you really think of the amount of land we have, and I think that part of our challenge and the reason we're here today, Jeff, is to communicate how little we need. And it's okay. We're going to make sure that we're very prudent. We're going to site these renewables in the right locations. We're going to be very prudent. We're not going to jeopardize the environmental aspects of our community. That's why we're all here. And it's doable. And that's really important for us to say. I think people have a tendency to think that they're going to be impacted by renewable sites, located everywhere amongst our community. And the answer is, what we need to do is make sure that we put enough into play for 30 to 50% of our load growth, and that's doable. Half of 1% of our land mass is all we're talking about, and I hope that we can, and I know we can. We can work together as a community and make sure that we're sustainable, and we balance all the competing priorities we have with worker housing and ag land and energy production. And I think that's when we actually are our best as a community, is when we all come together.
Well, this has been a great conversation. I've learned a lot. I'm sure you've learned a lot too. Let's kind of wrap this up. I think, Foster, you made some great points. Both of you have made great points about the future demand increasing so much. We've talked about the cost of another submarine cable. In our last conversation, we also talked about the rising prices of wholesale energy coming from the mainland, which really got my attention, really concerned me. And so we have this possibility. Another thing that stuck with me from our last talk, Foster, was your comment that the cost even of solar, and I guess tidal, I don't know, but solar could be actually competitive with what you're paying in tier 2 wholesale costs. So there could even be, I guess the point I'm trying to make is, it sounds like there could be some economic benefits as well as just supply, but there could be some economic reasons for keeping an open mind and exploring these renewable options, right?
No question. I mean, when you think of the cost of power, we know when there's an imbalance between supply and demand, prices are going to go up, and we're already seeing that on the trajectory. There's a limited supply of the hydro system that we benefit from, so any load growth is going to be what you just referred to properly was tier 2. What that really means is expensive market-based rates, and we either going to be a victim of whatever the market conditions are, and what we see on the mainland is people are not getting permits to build projects, and that's why it's getting pretty dramatic in terms of the imbalance between supply and demand. And we can combat that. What we need to do is consider ourselves that sustainable community that can balance things properly and make sure that we can incorporate renewable generation into our fuel mix. It allows us to lock in the price of that power when we build a project. And so we won't have nearly the escalations that the open market is predicted to have. We're talking about not only doubling the price of that tier 2 power that you referenced, but also going to threefold within another year. So what we do now really is going to pay off for 20 plus years in the future.
So it really comes back to where we started at the beginning of the last conversation, which was reliability, reliable power, and dare I say, reliable pricing. So thank you very much. Again, I've learned a lot, and I hope you have too. Thank you, Vince Dauciunas, and thank you, Foster Hildreth, and thank you for the work you do.
You bet.
Bye, Jeff. Appreciate it.
We'll see you soon.
Thank you.